Dr. B here, and I am doing a series on the Mentally Strong method, and today's focus is on grief. I'm Cristi Bundukamara, psychiatric nurse practitioner with over 20 years of clinical experience, but my real experience comes from the things that I've had to endure. And when we talk about the Mentally Strong method, it is truly a formula that teaches us how to think, organize, and choose. And I believe that that's mental strength, because it puts you in a position to be able to handle your past, present, and your future, right? So in the Mentally Strong method, we take time to think about what's bothering us. We organize it into categories so that we can appropriately deal with those categories. And then we choose what we're going to do with that, and then we make a personal vision. Today's focus is one of the categories called grief. And we will all experience grief in our life. And grief is, obviously when we lose someone to death, that's grief. There's also loss of a relationship. There's loss of a perception of reality. And you have to actually grieve trauma. And we'll talk about trauma in the next video. You have to actually grieve trauma because you have lost a piece of you when you experience trauma. You've lost a perception of safety in trauma. So loss is anything, grief is anything that you have lost. And obviously there are some things that are much harder. Trauma, losing a loved one, a spouse, a child, these kinds of things may take a lot more processing. But I have some bad news about grief. The only way to move forward and be stronger from grief is to feel the pain. And, we live in a culture of we don't want to feel the pain. We want to put it away. And I even remember, and you've probably heard of the grief process that, you go through these stages of grief and somehow you get to the end and there's acceptance. Acceptance is like this word that, we kind of think that, we're okay with it. And there's some types of grief that we may not and should not ever be okay with. Trauma is one of those. Unfortunately, I'm an expert in grief, and it's because I've lost two children. One in a abrupt loss of a drowning accident. And then one of my child who I was caring for and fighting a terminal condition. And Reggie passed away in 2016. And that's actually when, after that first year of truly grieving Reggie, is when I decided to start Mentally Strong. So I found purpose in that pain. I'm going to keep it together in this video, but there's some other videos that I talk about this story that you can see my pain. But today I want to talk about really like the process of, feeling that pain and making a choice. So in the Mentally Strong method, we start with this thought map, and let's say I'm feeling depressed one day or anxious about something, and I'm mapping it out, and actually Reggie's death or Johnny's death comes up in the map. It's not what I was thinking about that day, but it came up because I'm afraid my daughter's going to die, right? And so that is where the depression, the current depression and anxiety come in. But obviously Reggie's death and Johnny's death come up in that. Like you could work so hard, you could do all the right things, and bad things still happen. And so, that, let's just say that's my thought map in a nutshell. Well, then when I get over to think, organize, and choose, right? When I get to the organization, I take Reggie's death and Johnny's death and I put it in grief because there's nothing else I can do with that, right? But there's other things. There's this negative thought that goes around that. And that's a whole nother category because it's treated differently. And so in grief, and this is why we separate it, okay? So in that scenario that I was just talking about, there could be areas of anxiety, areas of injustice. There could be spiritual conflict. All of these things we'll talk about in other videos. There could be negative thought. and then there's grief, right? So it's not just all my son died and everything has to do with that, right? I have to put those things in a separate category, and then I have to take the time to feel that pain. Otherwise, it will continue to come out in other ways. And there's so many people that things come out physically because they're not processing that grief or that trauma. So my challenge to you is to take your grief, very specifically your grief, not everything, right? I don't want you to take your negative thought and spend time in it. This is why we have separate categories in the Mentally Strong method. Your grief is separate. You take that grief and you take an allotted time that I am going to grieve the loss of my child. And so there'll be days that I will get out all the pictures of Reggie, and there's definitely times of years. You know, his birthday, the day that he died, and those things are, you know, when we take that time, and I get out pictures, and I just allow myself to miss him, to cry for him, to ask God why, to pray, to meditate, and I take that time. That grief time is super important to do. And that's all that we can do with grief, is that we have to take the time to feel the pain. And as you do that, the intensity and frequency in which you have to do that will decrease. So that is the category of grief in the Mentally Strong method. I truly believe you can do this. Take the time to feel that pain because you are mentally strong.